Tonight at 10, after decades of debate, a government decision to expand Heathrow Airport by building a third runway. The decision is highly controversial, but ministers say it's right for the economy and proves that the UK is open for business.
We believe a third runway for Heathrow is the best option for our future. It's the best for the whole country to kind of create better connectivity to the different regions of the United Kingdom and to provide the best trade links to the world.
But there is strong opposition to the plans, with some ministers declaring that the third runway will never happen.
I think that Heathrow in the long term is not in the right place, and I'm afraid a third runway is undeliverable.
That's rubbish!
For the people of Harmondsworth near Heathrow, it's what they've been dreading. They say they'll fight the plans all the way. And one Conservative MP has resigned in protest, calling a parliamentary by-election. We'll have the details and reaction also tonight. A glimpse of life just 3 miles from Mosul, a special report with Iraqi troops on the verge of entering the city.
Until today, the ground I'm standing on used to be part of the self-declared Islamic Caliphate. This is now the front line in the battle against IS.
In Calais, work starts on dismantling the migrant camp. 4,000 people have now been moved out.
Hello. Hello, my love. How are you?
Care providers are warning that councils are not paying enough towards the cost of caring for the elderly at home.
The winner of the 2016 Man Booker Prize for Fiction is The Sellout by Paul Dayton.
And for the first time, an American author wins the Man Booker Prize for Fiction.
Here, the daily flight path seen over Gatwick and Heathrow as the two airports fought for an extra runway. Gatwick lost out, but despite that, bosses say they're standing by to deliver if Heathrow falls short.
Good evening. After decades of debate, government approval has finally been given for a third runway at London's Heathrow Airport. Ministers said the decision proved that the UK was open for business. But other ministers disagreed, including the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who said it was simply not deliverable. While business leaders have expressed strong support, saying that construction will create thousands of jobs. But as our business editor Simon Jack reports now, many in communities near Heathrow are determined to oppose the scheme because of concerns about noise levels and air pollution.
Heathrow, full to bursting, is to have a controversial extension. After years of delay, the government has decided to recommend a third runway.
The decision we've reached today is so important to the future of our country. Not just to tackle the immediate shortage of airport capacity, but to set our country on a course to even greater prosperity for future generations.
It's estimated Heathrow expansion will eventually create 77,000 new jobs by 2030 and boost the economy by £61 billion in 60 years' time. But Heathrow's biggest user is worried higher fares will be a price passengers pay. That's the worry of the man who runs the parent company of British Airways.
The airport has a history of inflating investment so that it inflates its rewards. We can't allow that to happen going forward. So it will be a critical issue. If airport charges increase and fares rise as a result of that, the economic argument for Heathrow will be significantly undermined.
And will the economic glow really spread to the rest of the UK? Politicians and business owners in Scotland are optimistic.
Being able to bring more people to Scotland, to Glasgow Airport, to Edinburgh Airport from Heathrow, it makes so much sense. You know, it's making it easier, making the journey easier, making the itinerary planning easier for travel agents as well, so that the choice can become Scotland.
Now, a third runway here at Heathrow is a long way away from being what they call shovel-ready. Political, planning, legal, environmental opposition is inevitable in the coming months. But in arriving at today's decision, they've achieved what previous governments could not. And of course, it's not the only mammoth project coming down the line. After an initial wobble, Hinkley Point got the green light. HS2 is coming fast down the track, and we may get some more spending in the Chancellor's autumn statement. Now, all those projects will have their critics, but others will see it as the beginning of an overdue golden age for infrastructure spending. Business leaders say this announcement sends an important message at a particularly sensitive post-Brexit moment.
This is a real game changer for the economy, not just in terms of the jobs it will create in the short run, but in terms of what it says about what kind of country we want to be, open to the world, outward facing, a global trading nation. I think particularly at the moment, it's very important in standing for something about the kind of nation we want to be in the future.
Not all costs can be measured in billions of pounds. This project has been stopped in its tracks before by environmental concerns, and it promises to be a key rallying point for its many opponents.
Air pollution across the UK is damaging the health of thousands of people. It's known to cause over 40,000 premature deaths across the UK, and this is particularly serious in hotspots such as can be found around Heathrow.
Hotspot is right. Each of these coloured traces represents a flight over the southeast today. It's already one of the busiest and most complex airspaces in the world. The journey to build a third runway will be every bit as complicated. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, as we heard, the government says that today's decision proves that the UK is open for business. But there is intense opposition among communities west of London, many of them represented by Conservative MPs, including the Prime Minister's own seat, of course, in Maidenhead. The Conservative MP for Richmond Park, Zac Goldsmith, has resigned in protest, and he will stand as an independent candidate in a parliamentary by-election. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has this report.
Morning, sir. Is it Heathrow or Gatwick?
By this morning, there was little doubt.
Gatwick or Heathrow?
Even the Downing Street cat would have guessed Heathrow. But after years and years and years of delay, ministers were ready to plump for the third runway, one of the most controversial decisions they'll ever take.
Mr. Speaker, this is a momentous step for our country. The decisions taken earlier today, which I shall outline in a moment, are long overdue.
But as the Education Secretary's face suggests,
Good morning. If Heathrow is chosen, will you continue your opposition?
not even the whole cabinet backs a new third runway at Heathrow. She and the Foreign Secretary will be allowed to protest politely.
Are you still going to oppose Heathrow, Boris? Yes, you are.
But could they call a halt?
I think it very likely that it will be stopped, and I just remind you that this is not the first time the UK government has publicly decided in favour of a third runway at Heathrow. You will recall it was the Blair government that did exactly the same.
A few dozen other Tories will oppose the plan. There is right now a majority for Heathrow, but it's not an easy sell.
This is a devastating decision I think for the national economic interest as well as for my constituents.
Just what have they been doing for all these months, apart from worrying about splits in the cabinet and the Foreign Secretary throwing himself in front of the bulldozers?
We welcome the decision after what has been world-leading prevarication from his government, finally almost ending what the Chamber of Commerce called the economic illiteracy of failing to make a decision.
And even a by-election beckons. The former Tory MP, Zac Goldsmith, has quit his party in protest. He won his seat vowing to block Heathrow. He'll try to keep it as an independent, doing the same, with no Tory challenger.
The sheer complexity, the legal risks, the costs, means that Heathrow expansion is not going to get off the ground.
Ministers want you to think the decision shows Britain's open for business now. But there's a year-long consultation, then no diggers on the tarmac for years, no planes on that new runway for almost a decade. That's if it goes according to plan. Despite the political and practical complications, the man in charge claims it will happen.
We have taken a decision that we believe is in the interest of the whole United Kingdom, that will send a message to the world that Britain is open for business in the post-Brexit world, that will create the regional connectivity that will demonstrate to the whole country that we are governing for the whole country. And we are not going to
guarantee that this is actually going to be built?
We are not going to shy away from doing what's best for Britain. Yes, there'll be challenges on the way, but this is a decision that's been taken after a lengthy process.
But can you guarantee that one day our viewers might board a plane, or will board a plane, on a new runway at Heathrow?
I'm absolutely clear that's what's going to happen.
Not if they can help it. Interesting moves from protesters today will be the least of the government's problems. There'll likely be challenges in the court from councils, green groups, maybe even from the rival airports. Theresa May was 11 years old when the first runways inquiry began, but she may have plenty of birthdays before the final plan is cleared to land. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the government has insisted that if the plan goes ahead, a £2.6 billion compensation scheme should be put in place to help residents. There'd be a purchase scheme for those losing their homes, and people affected by noise would be offered sound insulation. The expansion plans affect the areas to the north and west of Heathrow Airport. Business leaders say that there would be a clear economic boost. But as Elaine Dunkley reports now, people in the village of Harmondsworth have more immediate concerns.
No ifs, no buts. No third runway.
The village of Harmondsworth has been a battleground for Heathrow expansion for years.
No third runway.
Today, villagers arrived to hear the news they were dreading. A large part of Harmondsworth will be demolished to make way for a new runway.
Expansion will not be at any cost to local people, to passengers or to industry.
That's rubbish! That's absolute rubbish!
Some residents fear it could be the end of village life.
I would hate to see my house go. I mean, that would be the saddest thing. If they pulled my house down, I think, oh, crap buckets. With no promise of actually getting anything like what we've got.
I came here based on that there would be no third runway. We moved here in 2010, and David Cameron said in 2010, no ifs, no buts, there will be no third runway. So I'll be surprised if I vote Conservative again.
The Heer family own 3 homes on this road. All are in the demolition zone. More than 700 homes and the village primary school are due to go.
Around 20 people, we are on the same street. It's hard. If we moved out, we can't find the places like this all together.
The airport have said they will offer compensation.
Yeah.
Is that not enough?
The compensation is not matter for us. The family matters for us. We live together. That's the main thing for us.
Over in neighbouring Hounslow, some small businesses are delighted at the decision for expansion.
We need expansion, and it's good for the area. More jobs, more people moving in the area, so it's definitely a good decision.
I think it's marvellous news for Heathrow. I work at Heathrow, and it's good for the jobs around here. I understand the environment's going to be affected some way, but it's the jobs that matters most, I think.
And what about that environmental impact? Already this school playground in Hounslow has shelters to reduce the noise of planes flying overhead. As plans are drawn up, today's decision is likely to have a huge effect on the next generation living near Heathrow. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
Right, let's go live to Heathrow tonight, and Simon Jack, our business editor, is there. Simon, Boris Johnson was very confident today, saying this plan was undeliverable. What is your assessment of it?
Well, that is exactly the right question to ask, isn't it, Hugh? Will this ever be built? We heard the Transport Secretary there saying absolutely, but he faces very stiff political competition from within his own party. But I think the vulnerability to this may be a legal one, and whether this project can make clear the environmental hurdles it has to as it goes down the line. And they've made some assumptions about that in the years to come, the actual pollution from cars in this area will actually go down. And they're making assumptions that as that goes down, the overall area will pass those hurdles. Some people think those assumptions are pretty optimistic. I spoke to Willie Walsh, who owns the parent company, runs the parent company of British Airways. He famously told me once that he never thought it would be built in his lifetime. So I asked him how he was feeling today, whether he thought he was in good health. All I will say that if this does get built after all these years of delay, it will prove a lot of sceptics and big doubters and big enemies of this project very wrong.
Simon, thanks very much again. Simon Jack there with the latest at Heathrow. Now, in Iraq, on the 9th day of the offensive to retake the city of Mosul, most Iraqi government and Kurdish forces are still some distance from the city, but a group of special forces advancing from the east are now only 3 miles from the outskirts of Mosul, which has been a stronghold of so-called Islamic State. Our special correspondent Ian Pannell and cameraman Fred Scott are with the Golden Brigade, that is part of Iraq's elite counter-terrorism service, and they've sent us this special report.
For more than 2 years, these dusty plains have been plagued by darkness. Welcome to the caliphate of so-called Islamic State. It's the job of elite counter-terrorism forces to bring it to an end. Experienced and hardened as they may be, they know it's likely to be the toughest battle they've ever fought. This is the largest military operation in Iraq for years. An epic struggle for the future of the country. The troops face IEDs and mortar strikes as they fight ever closer to the heart of the caliphate. Mosul is ground zero for Islamic State and a fundamental part of Iraq for these men. No surprise, both are ready to fight to the death to control it. There are far more people here than the troops expected, and they're ordered to cease fire. So many Iraqis have known nothing other than a state of war. Civilians have been constantly caught in the crossfire. The little boy can't find his mum. A neighbour takes his hand, promising to help. But for some, the sight of men with guns on the horizon only brings new terror. And as civilians get out the way, the troops fan out through the town. They may have overwhelming firepower, but the dangerous groundwork happens here. Searching for IS, street by street, home by home. This town was declared liberated days ago, and yet troops from the counter-terrorism force are still having to clear house by house to make sure there are no remnants of Islamic State left. The battle for Mosul matters to Britain and America, to the people of Paris and Brussels, but above all, this is personal for many Iraqis.
The message for Daesh that they have to leave the Mosul city, and we will take the city if they like that or not.
And by the end of day 9 of this campaign, his troops were in control of all but the last town before Mosul.
Until today, the ground I'm standing on used to be part of the self-declared Islamic Caliphate. This is now the front line in the battle against IS. In truth, it's gone much better and much faster than anybody predicted. But this is now the front line. And right down that road, just 3 miles away, is the city limits of Mosul. And that's where the battle is going to be hardest fought. 6,000 members of the Islamic extremists wait for the combined forces of Iraq to try and take over the city.
Today, scores of families were told to leave town for their own safety. It makes uncomfortable viewing. Because if this campaign's to succeed, it'll have to work just as hard on bringing people together as it is on winning land. Ian Pannell, BBC News, outside Mosul.
In Calais, workers have started to dismantle the migrant camp, and officials say that 4,000 people have been taken to other parts of France in the past 2 days. But there are concerns that many migrants who'd been living in the camp have gone missing. Some aid workers believe that they're still in the surrounding area, hoping to make the journey to the UK at some later date. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson is in Calais with the latest tonight.
Well, another 1,600 people have been processed here today, most of them adults who've been transferred to reception centres across France. Inside the jungle, demolition has begun on the empty shelters, but there's concern that the problem is simply being moved elsewhere. The jungle is emptying, a little more each day. Empty shacks can be counted, information handed out. Far harder to know for sure where everyone has gone. Mohammed isn't planning on leaving, even though you can clearly see police vans from the water tap near his tent.
I live here. When police broke in for my home, I still in the tree.
You're going to stay in the trees?
Yeah.
You're going to go into the woods here?
Yeah.
There's talk of new camps springing up around Calais, even before the jungle has been cleared.
I am coming here to UK. Jungle is finished. Where are you going? No problem. I am going to another jungle.
Another jungle?
Yes.
Where's the other jungle?
It's here, looking here. It's really big jungle.
Aid workers estimate that perhaps 2,000 migrants have slipped away to sleep rough around Calais or head towards other cities in France.
We've seen people before that have kind of escaped into the forest where they know they won't be seen, so I think people will try and disappear at least at first, and then maybe go on to other places like Normandy, other places with ports close by.
Today the pressure began to rise. As the first empty shelters were dismantled, social workers, backed by police, went door to door, encouraging residents to leave. Aid workers have told us that lots of people have left this camp and melted into the fields around Calais. The government says thousands have got on the official buses to leave, but there are still many people living here in the jungle with no sign of leaving. This isn't over yet. Seconds later, a fire broke out. It's not clear how it started, but it's a reminder that as the numbers dwindle, it'll only get harder from here. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Calais.
The Northern Ireland Executive has announced a 10-year plan to reshape the NHS. Ministers say the current system is at breaking point. The proposals include more patients being treated in the community rather than in hospitals. Opposition politicians have questioned the lack of detail in the plan, which they say is not properly costed. Well, in a fortnight's time, American voters will be visiting the polling stations to elect their new president. But in states where there is some early voting, millions have already taken part and they've cast their votes. And there's evidence that turnout is high at this stage. Let's talk to our North America editor, John Sopel, who's at a polling station in the key state of Florida. And John, to what extent should we be reading anything into these early voting patterns?
Well, so many people have voted already that the parties have pretty good records of who has voted. One statistic stands out here in Florida. It is that so far it's estimated that 150,000 Latino voters have already cast their vote. That is double at the same time 4 years ago, and that is seen as very good news for the Democratic Party. That's the similar story that we're hearing in Nevada, in Texas, in Arizona and Colorado. And registered Democratic voters are way up on 4 years ago. So the nervousness in the Clinton camp is being replaced by a confidence, but also a sense that they have got to win big if they are going to counter the charges that this election is rigged. And that is the charge that is still being made by Donald Trump. One piece of good news for him today, if not for Americans: Obamacare, health insurance, went up 25%. That sort of issue plays straight into Donald Trump's agenda.
John, thanks very much. John Sopel there with the latest at a polling station in Florida. Now, militants have attacked a police training college in Pakistan, killing at least 60 people. Another 100 were injured. The attackers burst into a hostel in Quetta, where hundreds of the cadets were asleep. Both so-called Islamic State and a Taliban group have said they were responsible, as our correspondent Saba Eititaz reports now.
A night of horrors unfolded for the young recruits of Quetta's police academy. 3 militants wielding guns and wearing suicide bomber jackets broke in and started a bloody rampage, shooting and throwing hand grenades. Almost 500 police cadets and trainers were rescued after a military operation that lasted several hours. The local district hospital was filled with the survivors. Abdullah Bukhti was among those who hid in a closet as the militants picked off his colleagues one by one. His cousin was among the dead. His were the last cries he heard.
We were hiding in a room. My cousin shouted when he got shot in the eye. Then they shot him in the chest. When the commandos came inside, the suicide bomber blew himself up. There was a huge blast. It threw me almost 10 feet away.
A strange, uneasy silence outside Quetta's police academy, scene of last night's carnage. This is the third time this very building has come under attack, located on a road where security forces are often targeted by militant groups. As the city once again buries its dead, questions are now being raised as to how well prepared the government is to deal with this onslaught. The government admits there is a problem.
You have to be more vigilant and agility has to be shown. Having said all this, we're still all humans. If there are lapses, we will take them into account. We are not shifting the responsibility, we are not ignoring it, we are examining it.
Quetta has seen many similar attacks by both separatists and various Islamist militant factions over the recent years. Meanwhile, in the city, the people prepare once more to bury their dead. Sabah Azaz, BBC News, Quetta.
The vast majority of local authorities are not paying realistic prices to support older and disabled people. That is according to the UK Home Care Association, which says there's already evidence that home care providers are handing back council contracts because of a lack of funds. The government insists that more money is going into providing people with care at home. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt has the story.
Kim Hassel can travel miles during her shift. She covers large parts of rural South England as a care worker supporting people in their own homes. According to today's report, many councils simply don't cover the real costs of the time and training she and others need to provide that care.
Hello. Hello, my love. How are you? Nice to see you. And you?
85-year-old Pat Carrington normally gets help with washing and dressing. It means she and her 92-year-old husband can cope at home. Many of the people Kim supports are council funded. Often she finds she's up against the clock.
Some people might need an extra half an hour just so that you can put some washing on and change the bedding and change their clothes and things like that. It is a bit of a worry that they can't live the life they used to live before they needed care.
Today's UK Home Care Association report estimates it costs £16.70 an hour to cover basic home care costs, but on average councils pay £14.58, more than £2 less. At the not-for-profit agency where Kim works, they've already pulled out of 4 local authority contracts.
In one particular case, we were losing £100,000 a month, which clearly you can't sustain. And just things like recruitment costs a fortune. 1 month we spent £28,000 just on recruitment advertising, and we only found 5 people.
At the moment, 80% of the home care they provide here is for local authorities, but they've decided to survive, they will have to cater more for people who can afford to pay for themselves.
Councils blame underfunding by central government for the problems that care companies face.
If they cannot take local authority contracts and are solely relying on the private sector, then that means that local authorities are going to find it very difficult to support those who need their help, the most vulnerable people in our society.
Well, I'll help you make your bed for you.
The government says it's up to councils to ensure care companies pay their staff properly, and that it is putting significantly more money into providing dignified care for people who need it. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Now, at the Guildhall in the City of London, within the past hour, the winner of this year's Man Booker Literary Prize has been announced. Paul Beatty is the first American author to win the prestigious award for his novel called The Sellout. Let's join our arts editor, Will Gompertz, at Guildhall with the winner tonight.
Yeah, hi, Hugh. This is the book, The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which Amanda Foreman, the chair of the judges, described, I have to take my glasses off for this, a tirelessly inventive modern satire which slays sacred cows with abandon and takes aims at racial and political taboos with wit, verve and a snarl. That's you, Paul Beatty, with wit, verve and a snarl. You weren't snarling tonight, you were crying when you were awarded the prize.
Yeah. I've been crying a lot about this book for whatever reason. I put a lot into it, and yeah, I'm deeply thankful that people get something from the book. That means a lot to me.
It's been called a satire, it's been called a comic novel, it's been called an epic book which explores Americans' issues with race relations. All of those things you've questioned. How would you describe your own book?
It's just me questioning myself, really. What I think, how I see the world. What's history mean to me? What's progress mean to me? And for me, it's all funny because I never know what anything means, so it's fun to just try to figure it out.
You've got this central protagonist, this young guy who lives in this suburb of Los Angeles, who really has no name, who's a young black guy whose father gets killed by the police, who decides to do something totally counterintuitive and bring back slavery and segregation.
Yeah.
What are you exploring here? What are you going after, Paul?
Yeah, Doesn't sound funny coming out of your mouth. Sorry. Trying to take all these things and kind of not make fun of them, but try to make light of how we look at these things and how we see ourselves currently, how we examine ourselves through the past. And I think the guy in the book is kind of trying to create some silent history, like a history that only he knows about and only the people in his town know about. But he can't keep it a secret, I think.
No, well, he ends up in front of the state prosecutor,
Yeah.
of course. It reminds me a little bit, I have to say, of Richard Pryor's early comedy. There is a real anger to your writing. I mean, I know you use humour, but there is an anger about the issue of race relations in America.
Yeah. I don't know if it's anger so much as sadness, as so much as pathos, I guess. You know, it's anger's there, I guess. I mean, but America's an angry country, I think. It's an angry globe, I think. But it's not, I don't think anger's the central thing. I think there's a lot of frustration and irony, like this thing of what's the American dream? What does it mean for? And then when you get it, then what? You know, so it's there's just an anger. I don't know. I don't think it's an angry book, but I understand why people say that.
Well, do you know what? I think it's a great book.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Well done for being the first American winner of the
Well,
Man
yeah,
Booker
thank you,
Prize.
man.
Will any of your guys back home know what you've won?
My guy, some will, some won't.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, we do.
Thank you, man.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Congratulations, of course, to Paul Beatty and Will Gompers there. Thanks for that at the Guildhall. Quick reminder, Newsnight coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
Tonight, we're leading on Russia. You know what the West thinks of Putin and his country's actions in Syria and Ukraine. We're looking at what the Russians think and what they're being told. And it makes interesting viewing. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
That's Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.